Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today. Playing some more Golgari midrange for you today, and we have a hand that is perfect in every way, except it doesn't have black mana. So, keep her mull. Well, we have the upside here of being able to deploy our creature land because we don't have a turn 1 play without black mana, so glass half full and all that. We also have the upsides of still being able to cast our Tarmogoyfs, even with the hand as it stands. So even if we consider this kind of a mull to 4, which admittedly is much worse than mulling to 6, it still kind of functions. And Goyf, especially game 1, is the threat we most want to see on turn 2. We don't know what we're against. It's probably going to be our best threat. Now, if we do find a black source, we have all kinds of payoffs for that. We have a really, really flexible hand in terms of being able to handle anything that comes our way just about. And let's see, we have 53 cards left in the deck, 23 of them are lands. So that's a number that is a little bit below 50% for each top deck to be a land. And almost every land will be a black source or a Field of Ruin that can find a black source on turn 3, which is totally fine. We can go Treetop Village, Tarmogoyf, into Field of Ruin, field them, Thoughtseize them. So, still a borderline hand, but you know what? I'm feeling lucky. Let's give it a keep. Opponent does not mull either. They are keeping 7. Opponent goes Plains Ether Vial. Alright, so the decks on my radar now are Humans, Spirits, and Death and Taxes. In fact, Death and Taxes might be the most common Plains Ether Vial start, but it's the least common of the 3 in the meta right now. So, could also be like a WX Hate Bears deck of some kind. And look at that. Never punished, right? Never punished. Better lucky than good. We got the swamp. But we still just want to play out the Tarmogoyf. Next turn we can have a nice double spell turn of Goyf into Thoughtseize, even if we don't draw anything else relevant off the top. And they're hardly going to empty their hand next turn, right? So we'll take the more proactive play of resolving the Tarmogoyf, and then we will pass. Cavern of Souls. So it's one of the tribal decks, but not one that was on my radar. Okay, they have allies. Interesting. I'm not the most familiar with the ally deck, but Hada Freeblade is essentially their champion of the parish. And the ally decks that I've seen in the past play Collected Company, so I am moderately suspicious for Coco. I say moderately because, do Ether Vial and Coco coexist in that deck? Maybe, maybe not. Some archetypes like to combine the two. Many Spirits builds do at the moment. Slivers are another one that does. But for a lot of other tribes, it's either Vial or Coco, not both. And they haven't shown us green quite yet for the Collected Company. So, we'll see. Alright, we're continuing to draw black sources. That's fine. That lets us just lead off with the Thoughtseize, and pretty much no matter what they have, we're still going to have a reasonable play to make this turn. They will activate Vial in response, and they're going to play an Expedition Envoy, which is just essentially a 2-1 in tribe to round out their curve with cheap threats, I assume. Okay, so it is a Collected Company deck, and they are playing some red cards as well. So, this is an important decision point here. It really is. So, first of all, let's see what the heck this card is. Firemantle Mage. Firemantle Mage. Whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield, it's going to give menace to the team. So, they've got some good evasion, and they've got, of course, the Bushwhacker, which everybody who plays Modern pretty much knows about this card, but maybe not everybody knows that he's an ally, so that's an interesting one in here. And yeah, so they've got a couple good payoffs for going wide and a couple good ways to help them go really wide. Now, let's look at our own hand. Our interaction is basically just a pair of Assassin's Trophies at this point, which, while nice in terms of being a catch-all, means that we are realistically not going to keep them off of Collected Company mana. They've got to have green mana in their deck. I assume they're playing Basic Forest. I assume they're playing Fetch Lands to have a functional Coco mana base. With any kind of consistency, they're going to reach green mana for Coco if we interact at all. And of course, we're going to have to interact to win this game. For that reason, even though they're only on 2 land and they don't have any more, and it might look a little weird on the face of it, I'm going to take away a Collected Company. We're going to strip away the best value play out of their hand that we can. Now here, we don't gain much from hitting anything with a trophy, right? Number one, that opens us up to them top decking a land and they're already at Coco mana. Now, we know they're going to get there eventually. Getting there this soon would be bad for us. That would also put instant and creature in the yard. Only grows this to a 3/4. Not that exciting. I would rather just play out the second Goyf, develop our board, and pass. Alright. The opponent does not make a land drop and they simply pass. So they have 3 cards that are, for now, dead in hand. None of them will be dead in hand for very long. These 2 will be able to be at least vialed in next turn. But for now, they have 1 unknown and 3 dead cards. Field of Ruin is a draw that does not look very exciting, but I'm actually quite happy with it, and here's why. It lets us become the aggressor. It lets us get really proactive here, start putting them on the clock. Now, they're not going to assign a block. We get to Field of Ruin them. We get to take them off of Cavern, which means that they need to find a red source naturally if they want to, cast this for Surge or anything like that. They do have the Basic Forest as expected, and we get to crack in for 6. That's not nothing. We're still holding up Assassin's Trophy. And suddenly the texture of the game has changed. When you get that first attack in with a Tarmogoyf or 2, suddenly things look a lot different, right? Okay, so they have the Arid Mesa. They're getting a Sacred Foundry. Now, the fact that they got Foundry and not, a red-black or a red-blue land, that pretty much confirms to me that this is a Naya deck and not a 4 or 5 color land deck with a bunch of rainbow lands, so just worth noting. And they're going to play just the Fire Mantle Mage, setting up for a potential Bushwhacker next turn. Going nice and wide. They're going to have the Menace is kind of wasted this turn, but they still get to just develop their board and crack in for 5. Now we are going to say, alright, they've showed us enough payoffs where we kind of want to maintain the role of aggressor. And in order to do that, we want to stay ahead on life, and we want to stay ahead on the board. So they're going to be able to Coco. They're going to be able to maybe Bushwhacker at some point, and they might be able to produce some more evasive creatures or evasion effects that make it less and less appealing to try to play defense with our Tarmogoyf. So we are just going to be mana efficient, and we're going to follow the principles I just laid out. And we're going to trophy their biggest attacker. Now, that ramps them. It's not ideal, but we only take 2 here, and we get to kind of stay ahead on board. Liliana of the Veil is not that impressive on the face of it, because all she's going to do is kill their 1-drop. But because we're the aggressors now, that's actually just fine. This is a card that they are incentivized to deal with, so it's going to trade 1 for 1 and then a little something, even if it's just their 2/2 attacking her. That's still basically gain 2 life. if and when they deal with her, that will also grow the Tarmogoyfs to a 5/6, which is irrelevant. And so, all things considered, that's a pretty nice draw. So next up, we get in with a couple 4/5s. The opponent goes to 5. Okay. The only downside here is she did cost double black, so we cannot hold up Assassin's Trophy, but hey, you can't have it all. Remember that we had no black mana sources in our opening hand, so it would be a bit much for me to complain that I don't have 3 black sources for this turn, and I will refrain from doing so. Gotta be thankful for what we have, So they're finding more lands, which is not ideal for them. They're just going to main phase this company. Now that does make sense because they have some haste creatures in the deck, it seems, and perhaps some other reasons to do so. Ooh, now that is a haste creature, but that's the only creature they found. That's very bad for them. Coco finding only one thing never feels very good. So they've got Menace and haste for this turn, and a +1/+0 Anthem for the turn. But that is not going to be enough, and they recognize that. So let's assume they don't have a 1-drop to play. Actually, we know they don't have a... No, sorry, there's a 1 unknown. Let's assume they don't have a 1-drop to play, so this Cavern is just doing nothing for them. So what can they realistically do here? They can get in with 1 creature, take the Liliana off the field. Then my Tarmogoyfs are 5/6s. So then they have to violin a Bushwhacker or another 3-drop to chump block Tarmogoyf, and they also have to chump with the other mage. And that is just... then I still get to get in for 3, and that's just on board. Of course, I can just kill them with this trophy in hand. So even without them knowing about the trophy, though, they were pretty dead on board. They could probably have lived for another turn, but they're just not going to come back from that. So... yeah, we got lucky to find a black source early, that is for sure, but we did know that it was a calculated risk and that the upside was huge with a really strong, really proactive hand. And, we were able to capitalize on the upside. The fact that we were able to force them to scoop on turn 5, it just shows you how quickly these Tarmogoyfs can turn the corner. They get really big really quickly, and when there's 2 of them, the opponent does not have much time. So I think we picked the right time to start turning them sideways, to start getting aggressive. Liliana of the Veil was a nice follow-up to our early interaction, and yeah, that was enough to get us there. I will say this. There are some collected company decks in the format. Let's say, for instance, Elves. They play a really high density of 1-drops. So, as much as Coco is nice as an elf deck, if the elf player just picks up a couple mana dorks off of a company, yeah, that's bad, that's unlucky, but it comes with the territory. Deck like Bant Nightfall, that sometimes can be a little heavy on the non-creature spells, right? Relative to the usual numbers of a Coco deck. Maybe they play Retreat to Coral Helm and Path to Exile, and then other stuff post-side. So if they whiff on a Coco or have a semi-whiff where they only hit 1 thing, they cannot complain as much as maybe other decks. I don't think Allies falls under either of these categories. I don't think they play Mana Dorks, and I don't think they play a lot of non-creature spells. They're probably a deck that is all in on making their Cocos really good, really strong Coco hits, and the fact that they only got 1 off of it, and it was a mediocre one, yeah, very unlucky for them, so I feel for you, opponent. Unlucky, but them's the breaks, and let's go to the sideboard, see what we can kit out with for game 2. Alright, everybody, we are here siding against Allies, what I think is a Naya Allies deck, featuring Collected Company. So let's see what's good there. Let's start out by saying yes to this Engineered Explosives. They've showed us a couple different 1-drops. That's always a sweet spot for EE because we don't play any 1 mana permanents. And that's going to be nice in and of itself. They've showed us Hada Freeblade, Expedition Envoy, and Ether Vial. So even if there's no other 1-drops in the deck, which there might be, that's still pretty fine. Of course, we can also hit it on 2. We just run the risk of friendly fire with that, but obviously that'll be a judgment call. And yeah, I like EE here. The other thing to remember with a card like this is, as I have said in the deck text, this does not need to be a super massive blowout to be good. We interact so efficiently on a 1-for-1 basis in a lot of these matchups that even just catching a nice clean 2-for-1 with a card like this is completely fantastic and is going to be enough to put us ahead for good in the game. So that's why Engineered Explosives comes in. I'll just cut over to this Maelstrom Pulse because the same principle applies. It's a bit slow, but I don't think allies are fast enough where it's too slow. So, again, same principle applies. It's another piece of removal, and it has a 2-for-1 potential. Good enough for me. Nile Spellbomb, I don't see any reason to expect any kind of grave mechanics to speak of out of them. Like, I could see maybe, like, an Eternal Witness as a one-of grindy card or something like that, even though it's not an ally, but, until they show me anything out of the grave, I'm not interested in those. I'm not interested in anything in this column, really. Fulminator, not the matchup for you. Nissa Vital Force, now this might be a grindy matchup, but it's important to draw a distinction between the type of grindy matchup, right? So there are most grindy matchups are against decks that will be attacking our resources. They will be interacting with us. This might turn into a grind, but it's because we are going to be interacting heavily with them, while I expect them to be pretty much on a linear aggro plan, just with an increased density of value cards post-side. So, with them not interested in interacting with us so much, Nissa is less appealing. She's also still pretty slow, so even though this could turn into a long one, I still don't think we need her. An Obstinate Baloth, I have mentioned before, this card is fine against a lot of aggro decks. It's just a decent attacker, blocker, decent body all around, gains 4 life, ETB. But they've showed us evasion, right? It's kind of like bringing this in against Merfolk. It's just not that impressive against Island Walk. And it's not that impressive against Menace and Haste and whatever else they have. So I'm going to say no. Choke does nothing. So Golgari Charm is the one I haven't considered yet. Now, they do play some X1s, right? They definitely play some X1s, but regen mode seems irrelevant, destroy target enchantment seems irrelevant, even if they play something weird like Worship out of the side. I think bringing it in against us is pretty bad, and if they do, we have a million answers to it, so not worried about that. And while this does kill X1s, most of them seem to grow. Like, there's a lot of Champion of the Parish style effects over there on the old allies side of the table. I don't know if this can realistically be more than a 1-for-1. So I'm gonna say maybe, but probably not, because I think we have enough stuff that's really good to bring in. I'm gonna say yes to Collective Brutality. If you've seen the deck text, you know that I rate this highly against Collected Company decks. It can kill the early play. It can take the Coco out of their hand, and it can do both if it makes sense to escalate. Now, you want to escalate less conservative, or more conservatively than you would against Burn, for example, because both modes will not always be live. You're sometimes happy to just make this a 1-for-1 either way, but the 2-for-1 potential, or 2-for-2 to be accurate, potential here is still really nice. And as always, the floor on this card against aggro decks is just fine as a drain you for 2. So I like the brutality. I do not like extraction, and I do not like duress. They don't have any I win cards we need to take out of the deck at card disadvantage for us, and we're not interested in discard that cannot hit creatures. Even though some of their best takes with this card will be non-creature spells, whether it be, a turn 1 Vial if we're on the play, or a Coco with a Thoughtseize or something, they're still a Coco tribal deck. We still need to hit creatures. We need to be able to hit things in the hand, because otherwise discard will whiff too much. Also, we're probably going to be getting rid of some discard as well, so we certainly don't need more. And then the stuff that all just straight up comes in. We have the Wrath effects against the Go Wide tribal decks. Worth noting that Languish is, as always, nice because it can be one-sided in our favor, but there are also certain progressions where a piece of theirs will live through Languish as well. So just something to be wary of, but they're still both fantastic, and Kalidas comes in these matchups. He's a threat, he's an army in a can, and he's got lifelink, which is relevant, and in case they have any kind of recursion shenanigans going on, he takes care of those as well once he's up and running. So these 6 will all come in. If we have a lot of bad looking cards, we can revisit the Golgari charm. But so this is the type of matchup where I don't really want to go up on threats. So we're bringing in a threat in the form of Kalidas. Let's cut one away. Our 2-drop threats are all way too good to cut. So it's got to be a Tracker or a Tasigur. I think we're just going to cut a Tasigur. I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see a piece of Gravehaid or 2 out of a Naya deck. Just wouldn't shock me. So we're slightly hedging against that. We're slightly hedging against the Legendary rule, and we're just acknowledging that Tracker is a good way to outgrind them if they bring in some value out of the side. Our Planeswalkers are all pretty fine here. Liliana of the Veil, I think, is very good here, actually. They don't really have throwaway creatures that I've seen. Even taking away their 1-drops with an Edict is just fine here. Yeah, I think she just interacts really well with them. And Last Hope, there will be windows where she can cleanly take up to kill something, and if not, she's still great. She's still just great against the aggro strategies in general. So, certainly leaving those in. We have a couple paths we can take now, because most of our stuff that's still in here is really good, and we need to make 5 cuts. So the first thing we can say is maybe we got a little overzealous with Brutality. Maybe 2 is enough. That's a consideration. We certainly don't want to cut Abrupt Decay, Maelstrom Pulse, and Fatal Push. These cards are all great. So what we can do here is say, well, we have enough removal that we don't want to ramp them. So we could cut our Assassin's Trophies. I think that would be a little aggressive. Yeah, we have enough removal, but it's a tribal deck. We want all the removal, We want it all. And ramping them is just the cost of doing business with this card. The fact that we can have such a wide answer against so much of the meta means that, yeah, it feels bad when Abrupt Decay would probably kill anything they're playing anyway. They're a Collected Company deck. They don't want to go above CMC3 with their creatures for the most part. So this is just kind of strictly worse than a Decay in this matchup, but whether we want to say that means we cut them, I think that would be a mistake. But it is an option. We could just say we're trading out subpar removal for better removal. We're trading out trophies for Wraths and for Pulse and EE, That's not entirely unreasonable, but I would rather look at cutting discard effects. Now, as good as discard can be, like I said, if we're on the play, popping the turn 1 Vial, Thoughtseize to take away the Coco, etc., that's all fine, but we can just play this like an attrition-based matchup and have just a really high density of amazing top decks, and I think I'd rather do that. So let's move the discard over here and take a look. We need to lose 5 cards, huh? So let's see how the triple Brutality works for us. I really think that card is going to be sweet here. Inquisition or Thoughtseize. Well, I kind of like having access to Thoughtseize for the Coco, but I kind of like preserving our life total against all of that menace and haste and the go-wide strategies. So why don't we just hedge? Why don't we do a little bit of a split? We'll do 1 of each, and then we will trim away a trophy. We still have way more removal and way more 2-for-1 removal potential overall. So I'm fine just shaving 1 copy of our worst piece of spot removal here. And we are at 60. I don't know. I think that looks pretty good. So Let's go to game 2, see what the allies can muster. Alright, my friends, here we are for game 2 against Naya allies, and our hand is spectacular. We have both colors of mana in our opener. We have a turn 1 Fatal Push. We have a turn 2 Tarmogoyf. We have lots and lots of backup interaction, and we have Liliana of the Veil. Now, in matchups like this, against a go-wide Collected Company deck, Liliana is not enough on her own to keep them down. But if you follow up a flurry of interaction by slamming a Liliana on turn 3 or turn 4, man, she can really put the game away. She can take care of their last creature. Maybe if they're a little bit choked on land, she can tick up and take something out of their hand, and then she ticks down to kill something again. That is enough value that you are almost certainly going to win. So I really like this hand. Of course, we do need to see a third land at some point for that Liliana, but this is a snap keep. Our opponent has kept 7 as well. Opponent will fetch and shock and play a Hada Freeblade. Alright, that's their champion of the parish, basically. Good enough. We draw another Liliana. Now, that could be good, but we, of course, are still looking for lands. No need to push anything quite yet. Let's just play the Blooming Marsh and pass. They find a Cavern of Souls, and they play Kazandu Blade Master. This card takes me back. Back in my kitchen table days, my friends and I used to go through common and uncommon boxes at stores. I don't know if many stores still have those, but back in my day, you could go through the common and uncommon boxes and pick up some sweet cards for 5 cents, 10 cents a piece, whatever it might be. And I saw this guy one day and was like, okay. And of course, because it's kitchen table, we're all just playing tribal decks. So I'm like, he goes in my humans deck, and my soldiers deck, and my ally deck. Wow, this card's so good. So, anyway, big fan of this. And I do believe that it's a higher priority Fatal Push target than Hada Freeblade, as nice as it would be to justify pushing the one that's going to attack me this turn. I think we want to kill the thing with First Strike and Vigilance, and have confidence that we will outsize or otherwise be able to answer the Freeblade. We are, after all, a Tarmogoyf deck. Now we draw a Tireless Tracker. Great card and all, but our hand's starting to look quite clunky. We don't want to get stuck on 2 mana and be forced to ramp them with our Assassin's Trophies. That would be pretty bad. But still, we're doing alright so far. We always wanted to turn 1 push, and we always wanted to turn 2 Goyf. Like, we've still executed our plan. We just need to see lands from here on out for a couple turns at least. Opponent finds another Freeblade. Sure. Opponent passes. Okay, so they are also on 2 lands, which means we definitely don't want to trophy them quite yet if we can help it, and I don't think we need to. We did find our 3rd land. This would be great if it was another Blooming Marsh, or a Swamp, or a Verdant Catacombs, or an Overgrown Tomb. But instead it's a Hissing Quagmire, so all we can do is pass. There is no need to get super aggressive here. We are going to be able to execute a pretty decent Protect the Queen strategy beginning next turn, if all goes well. They play an Oran Reef Survivalist. Okay, this is just basically another Champion of the Parish style effect. I call them Champion of the Parish effects. It's a little different because these things put counters on themselves, as well as when other things enter, they get counters. So, just got to give them their full due. You know, it's an interesting take on that mechanic, I guess. So they get a bunch of counters. They're nice and big. So now, the fact that they found another Champion of the Parish style card has changed my mind in terms of wanting to be a little passive here. Now I want to be more proactive. So we are going to get on the Liliana plan, and we are going to Liliana them out of the game. That is the idea. So we're going to be able to protect the queen, but in order to do that, we have to stay ahead on life, or we would like to stay ahead on life, and we have to stay ahead on board. So we give them a land that's not good and all that. I hear that, but we are going to be able to go on the Liliana plan until they force us off of it. Now, for the reasons I've already explained, just getting the Liliana down there and trading 1-for-1 is fine. It also will grow the Tarmogoyf. Like, if they find a way to kill her, it's going to grow the Tarmogoyf, and it's going to let us potentially shift gears into the aggro plan a little bit more readily. Let's see what they have for us here. Kabira Evangel. 2/3. Whenever it or another ally ETBs, allies get protection from a chosen color till the end of turn. Well, okay, that's a good way for them to get through the Tarmogoyf, so they will, of course, just name green. And, yep, they're going to take the Liliana off the field. That's totally fine because we have another one in hand. Now, Field of Ruin's a fine draw, but let's slow down here and figure out our line, right? So the fact that we're still gated by black mana means that we cannot have a Liliana plus Fatal Push turn, which would be very tempting otherwise. We could hold up, we could play the Field of Ruin, or we could not play the Field of Ruin, we could just play no lands, and we could hold up Fatal Push Assassin's Trophy. That's not bad. That's reasonable. But I don't feel like I'm under much of a direct threat yet. I'm still at 18, and my Tarmogoyf is 4/5, and 4/5 is kind of, this is not a scientific analysis, but it's kind of feels like the threshold at which you start really mattering in terms of your clock, right? Your clock starts really mattering. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a turn off interacting. We're going to develop our board, and we are going to pivot to the driver's seat in terms of who is the aggressor. So we get to get in for 4 without giving them any other information, and they choose not to block. Then we're going to play our Tireless Tracker and immediately get our value out of it with a clue on the field. So that is, it looks a little weird because we had a few different ways to hold up interaction, and now we're holding up none, and we can't even crack the clue, right? The Field of Ruin does nothing right now. So, looks a little weird, but much like how a traditional nice curve for Golgari is to go turn 1 discard to turn 2 Tarmogoyf and then go back to interacting on turns 3 and 4, here we kind of took a turn off of interacting to have another turn 2. Like, we developed the board even further, and then next turn we're going to go back to interacting with a lot of really good interaction still in hand, and some gas in terms of finding more draws on the field, and 2 threats instead of just 1. So I have been suspicious of Path to Exile. We haven't seen it yet, but in case Path is in our future, it is nice to have a second threat, obviously, on the field. They tap for Naya colors, and they play a Fire Mantle Mage. We saw this guy game 1. This is going to give them menace. Sure. Let's see what they do with it. So they don't have a 4th land, and they just crack in for 2, and that's the right attack. Their Free Blade just gets dueled to a draw by the Tarmogoyf as things stand, so they might as well leave it back to block. We draw a Field of Ruin. We would have preferred to see, a Catacombs there, or even a basic Swamp, or Overgrown Tomb would have been fine, but we'll certainly take Field of Ruin. Making more land drops with the tracker down is never bad, and we can indeed use this colorless mana at least to crack a clue, even if it's a little awkward in terms of casting our spells. So, still respecting the Path to Exile, we are not going to get too cute with, Field of Ruin, your land, then Fatal Push you, anything like that. Even though it would be nice to get that 3rd black source online, let's not do that quite yet. So instead, I'm going to just accept the fact that I'm not playing a Liliana yet, and we're going to Fatal Push the Free Blade. Just cleanly answer that 4/5, and now we get to continue our newfound role of aggressor. And we're actually threatening a lot of damage here. Seeing that, our opponent will get in front of the one with potential to be the biggest. This also forces us to crack at least one clue here, so I think if they're going to make a block, that was the correct one. We find Scavenging Ooze. Alright. That is a fine draw, but all of a sudden we are just extremely far ahead, aren't we? Like, we're really far ahead on board. So as much as Scoos is nice, I really don't want to walk into, like, a Wrath of God. So we'll just pass, especially because we can hold up both Trophy and Clue right now. Feels pretty good. Okay, they did find their fourth land. They just name Ally with the second cavern. Lead the Stampede. Alright, this is a card that you don't see that often in Modern. It's very good in Elves, but it's very good in Elves because Elves have kind of a unique way to realistically cast the things they find that turn using Heritage Druid's ability. Most other decks cannot. So this is one that's probably just in the sideboard for grindy matches to try to outvalue decks like mine. That's what I imagine the role of lead is in a non-elf creature deck. So they're going to find 3 cards, which is a pretty nice value for them. They've got a couple Blade Masters and a Bushwhacker. Alright, fair enough. And they're able to use their mana effectively this turn to play a 1-drop. However, our clue is also going to be pretty effective. It's going to find us a Collective Brutality. That's a nice one right now. That's for sure. And they're not going to get frisky with the Evangel. They're just kind of priced into blocking here. Languish is another nice draw, but it's not that nice right now. It's just barely going to kill our tracker. It would be a real shame to have to fire that off while the tracker is just still in its range. And it's going to make our attacks anemic with the Tarmogoyf, and we really want to press our advantage before they can turn their card advantage into board presence. Like, we just got buried in card advantage. Even though we're still even on cards in hand, all of our hard work to run them out of resources has kind of been undone. So we need to end the game as soon as possible. And for that reason, it is now Liliana time. Now we're very happy to just get her down and trade for anything. We don't really care what happens to her after this. No offense, Lily, but, you did your job. And now this is about as good as a Wrath, right? Because they have no choice but to block here. Otherwise, they are taking 10. Alright, now that I've seen Lead the Stampede, like, I really don't expect there to be a literal Wrath of God in the deck. Like, they still could play maybe a Settle the Wreckage or something like that, but in the interest of using my mana, in the interest of not getting stalled out by some combination of chump blockers and Path to Exile, I will indeed play out my Scavenging Ooze and force them to have a really good turn here to stay in the game. And they draw and they scoop, so clearly they did not have what they needed. But we were in quite a commanding position. We had 2 really, really big threats and a third threat that can easily become very, very big. We're also still at a really nice high life total, destined to become higher with Scavenging Ooze activations. If their board ever somehow gets out of control, we have a Wrath that our stuff is going to survive. All 3 of these, after a couple turns, would be likely to survive a Languish. We have yet more removal, and we have Liliana, who is going to be able to get value out of the +1, because there's no way they dump out their hand, even if they stay alive this turn. And then she can -2 to kill something else, which, as I pointed out in the sideboard or in the opening hand discussion, is really, really sweet in a matchup like this. So we just kind of had it all. We finished in a really commanding position. Yeah, it was a good game. Now, allies are not tier 1 or anything like that, but, they're a reasonable, respectable deck. They kept 7 both games, and they curved out really well both games. Game 1, they had 2 collected companies. Granted, we stripped one away with a Thoughtseize, and the other one was a semi-whiff. And Game 2, they had a Lead the Stampede for 3, so it's not like they had particularly bad progressions against a green-black deck. Quite the opposite. They had some reasonable ones, but this is why I like having a lot to do in the sideboard against decks like this. You will see a lot of other Golgari players that are more loaded down on discard effects than I am. Some of them will play a 4th Collective Brutality, a 2nd Duress, a 3rd Thoughtseize, even all of the above, or some of the above. A lot of players will play a lot of Damping Spheres. I've seen 4 Damping Spheres in BG Rock decks. I don't think we need such high numbers of things like that. I think that boarding in more than 8 direct discard spells in any given matchup is probably just too many. We still want to retain our high density of threats. And for Damping Sphere, things like that, it's like, after Assassin's Trophy, that card is mainly for Tron. We've got a million ways to keep them off of Tron. We have to worry about ending the game before they can just hardcast their stuff. So I don't know if playing Damping Sphere on turn 2 instead of a threat is even good. And I know it's good against combo, but I feel like we're well positioned against those decks. I'll stop it here before I go on too much of a tangent, but my point is, a lot of Golgari lists that I've seen do not have, in my opinion, enough to bring in against creature decks, against mid-range decks, and I would consider a deck like Coco Allies that plays some number of Lead the Stampede in the 75 to be kind of a middle ground between a mid-range deck and a go-wide aggro creature-based tribal deck. It's kind of both. So the fact that I have a lot of cards to bring in these types of matchups, man, it just shores up those matches really, really well, and I truly do not believe we lose all that much in other matchups, if anything at all, by doing so. Remember that these decks can run you over Game 1 a significant amount of the time, so Game 2 and Game 3 really need to be in our favor if we're going to consistently win these matches. So anyway, but we did get their Game 1, and we certainly got their Game 2. You can perhaps tell the difference, though, in terms of how much better our deck looked Game 2. Even though we didn't see too many sideboard cards directly, the fact that we did have a higher density of brutality for, whatever they did next, this would be good against. Like, if we have reason to believe they're on Coco still in hand after they play to the board, we can nab that. We can kill the board, or we can drain them for 2, which is relevant because they're at such a low life, and we have a manland, so that puts them within lethal many different ways. And the fact that we had Languish to back up all of our normal main deck stuff, with this progression, we just weren't really going to lose, honestly. So anyway, that's about a wrap for this particular video. Thank you all, as always, so much for watching. Good games, well played to the opponent. Sorry you had a whiff on your Game 1 Coco. That was unfortunate, but yeah, good games, fun match, and I will see you for the next one. Have a good night.